Hello, I'm Christopher Lee. Welcome to Ghosts. Welcome to Hobbs Manor, my friend. Please excuse me for calling you out at such a late hour. I trust you had a pleasant journey. Mark my words, you have an eventful time ahead of you. Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Dr. Marcus Grimalkin, and I have devoted my life to the study of the paranormal. It is time for me to decide once and for all whether ghosts are reality or fiction. I hope that you can help me to make this decision. My visit to Hobbs Manor, a house that is world famous for its ghostly activities, is the climax of my life's work. I came here to gather the evidence around me, the documents, films, and records that I have painstakingly collected over the years. Make use of the research material that you will find inside the house. You will have to look carefully for it, as objects in this house appear to gain a life of their own. Use my findings to make your own decisions. If you join me on my quest, you may be rewarded with great knowledge, but be warned, you may not like everything that you find. Unless you want your luck to make a turn for the worse, never sit in another person's chair soon after they have left it. Unless you want your luck
the case at the empty, haunted church where the team and I went to look because we'd been told by various students and people that they'd seen figures moving in the gloom there. This particular church I didn't know existed, but when we went there, figures did move in the gloom. There were tombstones which had been disturbed. This strange mist filtered into the church. The atmosphere was intensely oppressive. That was probably the most frightening case that we actually went to.
There was one case, I think, that was interesting from the point of view that my fellow investigator and myself were somewhat scared. You get blasé about this, but we were in a house, an old house up in the Fens, north of Cambridge, and in a room that nobody would sleep in or live in, because they said funny things happened to them, and they were using it to store furniture. And when they put electricity in the house, they put everything else but in that one room, and we're in there and sitting there, and we got all the other helpers, actual members of the University Society downstairs, doing a Ouija board, not to communicate, but to get everybody round so that we could control them. And suddenly there's bumps and thumps coming. We locked the door from that direction across the bare boards. And I'm saying to Alan, this is my friend, Alan, cut it out. He's saying, cut it out yourself. I said, well, it's not me. And bang, 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 we got 2 torches. And we're shining. I mean, we've known each other for years. I knew he wasn't doing it, he knew it. But it got quite scary because it's a thump, 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 you see. And the last thump was on a brass bedstead over my head. And I thought, wow, I don't like this. And Alan said the same, more or less the same thing. People were making a noise downstairs, and we used that as an excuse to go down and tell them to keep quiet. We got to the door, and we forgot that we had put strings across there in case somebody was going to take us for a ride. And we went through there and collided with that, came back, and as we came back, we heard a noise, and we swung our torches around, and we saw a chair going across the room and land bang on the wall. That was a bit scary.
Lots of things have frightened me, but not ghostly things. In the course of investigating supposedly haunted places, I've been down in cellars with no lights on and no torch, just hoping something will come out of the slimy walls. You know, I've slept in several bedrooms where I've been told no one slept there for 20 years, and I sort of go to bed and go to sleep, you know, wishing something spooky would come along. As a child, I can certainly remember seeing apparitional type things and being frightened. But nowadays, if I see something like that, I think, oh, there comes an apparition. I think it's my own mind, so it's not remotely frightening. I'm quite happy to go to bed at night, see all kinds of things being created by my mind, and they don't spook me. So the answer is no, but of course it might happen. I might get a terrible shock and one day go to a haunted place and see that ghost that I so far don't believe in.
Local vet Keith Michael has assured us that the cat will make a full recovery. And finally, tonight's special report investigates a real-life haunting. The residents of this 300-year-old house, set deep in the countryside of West Yorkshire, England, have been experiencing strange phenomena. An apparition of a woman, known as the Nanny, has been seen in various locations around the house, invariably carrying washing in her arms. Local historian Norman Reed told our reporter that local records show that a wet nurse lived here in the 18th century. Witness Mavis Hartley is convinced that the apparition she has seen is the spirit of this woman. We have arranged for Ruth Breary, a woman with psychic abilities, to visit the house to give her opinion of the ghostly events. She has not spoken to the residents before and has been told nothing of the events. Ruth's visit to the house proved largely uneventful until she entered a small bedroom on the first floor. She made the following statement to our reporter after the event. As soon as I stepped into the bedroom, I felt a wave of oppressive cold come from the eaves and near the fireplace. I knew that this was a place where the spirit had slept. I didn't need to see her to know she was there. You've been watching Viewpoint. I'm Ria Searcher. Good night.
Look closely at the cinders within the hearth. If you find any that are shaped like a coffin, there may be a death in the family.
I don't know. The problem with science is that it does deal with things that can be measured. Like take something apart in a laboratory or measure it or stick things into it or use telescopes to actually ascertain whether there is something out there. And this seems to me to be so diametrically opposed to a scientific approach. How do you actually measure the presence of a ghost, for example? Can you actually film it? Is it possible to record its movements? I don't know, I doubt it. Having said that, though, there is actually a body in existence, a psychic research body that produces a report quite regularly and as scientifically as possible. It would actually go into a house where perhaps they'd suspected there was a ghost or a haunting, and they would actually put this down in print. I suppose as cold and as clinically as possible, but they just actually relate the actual events that took place. And this is actually available in most public libraries for people to go and peruse. So I suspect that in the end, people will actually say, we have had an experience of a ghost, or we have had an experience of something that we can't actually put down in so many words. But there are people who are cataloguing these and saying, it's enough of a phenomenon right across the human race to say we can't dismiss it.
I think we're very close to it, because you see, the team and I are all skeptics. That is, we doubt, but we accept sensible evidence. Whereas people who say they're skeptics and don't believe, of course, are not skeptics, at least they're not scientists, because a scientist has an open mind. They're dogmatic, they're paranoid disbelievers. We're the true skeptics. We doubt in the absence of evidence. But I think we're getting there.
It's got to be done much more accurately, with a lot more equipment, a lot more analysis, and I think more important than anything else, with all that backup, the psychology of the people involved is very, very important. We don't know what causes this, but it does seem to be linked to, in many ways, people's beliefs and the circumstances they find themselves in other words, the mental state. I don't mean crackers, their mental outlook. From that point of view, the laboratory investigation we were talking about earlier can help us. But as for a breakthrough, I don't think I shall see it, and I don't think my children will see it, and I don't think my grandchildren, if I have any, will see it. And I'm inclined to think that it won't be a parapsychologist that will produce this phenomenon. I think probably an orthodox scientist will find something and the whole thing will fall into place. Because I'm inclined to believe that the phenomenon that we are dealing with can be explained eventually in scientific terms. Now, not everybody will agree with that, but that is my belief. So that's what we should be aiming for, and I think that's probably in time what will happen.
I think it would be very exciting if we had some evidence that ghosts exist. The problem is, I think what's most likely to happen is that we'll go on getting the kinds of so-called evidence that we've had for years and years. That is stories of people seeing things, apparently matching up to how things were in the past, but when you go and check, you can't really be sure, and so on. What would really make a difference would be if somebody came up with a plausible sounding theory about ghosts. And most of the theories that I've heard just don't really stand up at all. They involve all kinds of very strange ideas of energy or of vibration or of storage of information, which just don't fit with anything that we understand, and you can't do anything with them. What we need is a theory that will say, right, it's using this kind of energy, it's storing the information in this kind of way, it interacts the brain like this, now let's test it. If it's true, it predicts such and such an effect, let's go and look for that effect. That is how normal science proceeds, by putting up a theory and trying to see whether it can make predictions that come out right. If we had that in the realm of ghosts, we might get somewhere. But it hasn't happened yet. I think it would be very interesting if it did.
The answer lies in Easter.
My views about ghosts and hauntings, and indeed about many other psychic phenomena, have changed dramatically since I first got interested more than 20 years ago. When I first came to know about these things, and I read books about ghosts and I heard all these stories about them, it seemed to me obvious to believe them, and I did believe them. And I started to theorize about, where could ghosts be coming from? Could they be, somehow imbibed in the walls and giving out vibrations? And I made up lots of theories of my own, and because I believed all the stories. After a few years of doing research in parapsychology and doing my own experiments and so on, I began to become far more skeptical, simply because I didn't find psychic phenomena in the lab. But I still thought, well, out there there are ghosts and so on. And then I began investigating, going to haunted houses, being called on when people had poltergeists and so on. And gradually the same thing happened there. The more I began to learn about them, the more I saw things at first hand, the more I really questioned people carefully, the more it seemed to me that psychological phenomena and not psychic or paranormal phenomena lay behind the ghosts.
I was a very sceptical young man at school here in Cambridge. I thought I knew all the answers. Science would explain everything. And why did people believe in ghosts? Absolute rubbish. I mean, scientific age. But I got a mother at home who was a very sensible little woman, and she seemed to be able to forecast what was going to happen. There's a contradiction, you see. I knew my mother was sensible, she wasn't nuts. And yet, somehow or other, science seemed to explain everything. So I thought, well, I don't know, this is odd. And I went out to India, and I was in the Navy, and I saw some very peculiar things out there. The most peculiar thing, I was told that we were all on leave up in the Nilgiri Hills, which is South India, 6,000 feet up. And I was told that there was a fakir, a holy man, up in the mountains. Anyway, cut a long story short, I went up to see him. It was a long climb up this hill, and there he was on a flat piece of ground with a sheer drop on the other side. And I had to go through a gully. And he knew I was there, and he said, what do you want? And I said, I hear you can do miracles. And he said, all right, okay, but you're far too materialistic. But at any rate, I'll give you what you want. Look over the hills, my son. About 70. Look over the hills. And I thought, well, I'd better pacify this silly old twit. I'm looking over the hills. He's standing here. And I think, that's funny. And I turn, and he's not there. He's the other side of a stream rushing down. Now, I was a boxer in those days and very fit, and I couldn't have done it. And I thought, how'd you get there? cunning old devil, ropes, hell, couldn't do it, I can't do it. And he's saying, look over the hills. And I'm looking, look over the hills, and I thought, I better look over the hills. What? And then the voice says, well, my son, did that entertain you? And he's back to me. It shook me rigid. I was very arrogant to start with. When I went down that hill from that little episode, I wasn't half as cocky as when I went up.
Have you checked your reflection recently? Have you checked your reflection recently?
After cashing up on an evening shift, I put the float in its tray in the filing cabinet, locked the filing cabinet and left the restaurant. Coming back the following morning, went to take the cash tray out of the filing cabinet, and the money had been removed from the filing cabinet and placed in little piles underneath the tray. A couple of other incidences that have happened in the restaurant, not directly affecting me, were we had builders in the restaurant earlier in the year, and they let themselves in the back door, and the posts that arrived that morning had been neatly stacked halfway up the stairs. As the post arrives at 7 in the morning and the night shift finishes at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's no explanation why that happened. Also with the builders, they had an Alsatian dog which used to accompany them when they were doing their work, and they were doing some work in the bar upstairs in the restaurant, and the dog refused. The dog was taken up to the restaurant, up to the bar, and it refused to stay in there. It whimpered a lot and ran down the stairs and would not go anywhere near the bar.
Most ghosts look absolutely normal. You can't distinguish them from ordinary people very often. They may be transparent. It came about because some ghosts are seen as just luminous blobs, and sometimes maybe you would see a couple of holes. There's a famous photograph of a ghost that has a couple of, you know, sort of eye holes in a sheet and that. So there's a little bit of evidence that sometimes they might indeed appear like that. But I can tell you that most ghosts are indistinguishable from people, and indeed, unless your attention is drawn to the fact, you often don't realise that you've seen a ghost.
Well, the popular image of a ghost is that it's something sort of whitish or greyish, transparent, with no feet. It sort of hovers along without touching the floor, and often hooded or veiled in some way. And I think this is what you'd expect if ghosts are coming from people's own minds and yet are sort of mentally projected out into the real world. There's a clash between seeing what's there and mixing it up with your own visual image. So that I think this is exactly what you'd expect, this kind of transparency. The feet are tricky because you've actually got to connect them to the floor, so it's easier if your brain's constructing a mental image to leave out the feet and have it sort of float along. And of course, if you haven't got much information and it's just a vague shape, it will look kind of hooded and monk-like, hence the grey ladies and the monks and so on of the traditional ghost. I think it just reflects the facts that they're mental images.
Here is a photograph taken on the Bakerloo line in the tunnel, and we think it took place, the actual photograph took place somewhere around under Madden to Swords, because the Bakerloo line runs under there. This was taken by a lady who is married to a Chinese gentleman whose nephew had come over on holiday, and they were on the underground train when this lady took a photograph of her young nephew. He had a camera in his hand and she took a photograph of him. When the photograph came out, there in the window of the train in the background is a picture of a man in an electric chair. Now that picture we found out was an exact duplicate of the figure in the Chamber of Horrors in Madden to Swords, and he was you may not remember, but before the war in the 1930s, the aviator Lindbergh, his child was kidnapped and killed, and that was the man who they said did it, and he was executed for his trouble. The only difference between that and the model in the Madden to Swords is the sparks coming out of the hand. Now that's been examined very closely by experts. We're almost certain it's not a poster, and anyway, what's a poster doing in the tunnel of the underground? Well, you can draw your own conclusions. But when I interviewed this lady, and I said to her, well, after a little conversation, I said to her, by the way, what's your hobbies? She says criminology. So have we got an example of what we call thoughtography? And we know this is possible because we've had examples of it, of people transferring their thoughts onto film. Two pictures here. One is taken by a grandmother of a small do she had in Halifax, in the Liberal Club there. I believe it was a birthday party for her grandson. And she took some photographs of these entertainers on the stage. Now, most of the photographs on there are perfectly normal, but in between these normal photographs is a photograph of, up here, behind one of the entertainers, a picture of her mother and her stepfather, who've been dead for 5 years. Now, I asked her, when I started to question her on this, I said, have you got any other pictures of your mother and stepfather? She said, yes. I said, are they similar? She said, yes. And she showed it to me. The picture was very similar to that, but the mother was wearing a different dress, and she was about 10 years, the mother and the father were about 10 years older and had white hair. So here we have a duplication, literally, of a photograph that was taken much later in life, and yet they appear much younger. Quite extraordinary. No explanation for that. Here, this one was taken in some caves in the south of France. The woman who took this picture said that she was alone when she took this picture. She took it from a gallery. There are other people in this. She was with a party of people. They'd moved on, and she took the photograph on her own there, standing by the railings. When the picture came out, there was this white cloaked figure there, with its hand on the handrail, and on the hands are a couple of rings. This is the classic type apparition. This was taken by an elderly lady in a private wood in Oxford. Now this is another one of those strange and very telling photographs. She took a picture of her son, or was it a son or was it a nephew? I'm sorry, at the moment I just can't remember. Anyway, she took a photograph of this gentleman with his girlfriend in the woods. Nobody else in the woods, just herself. Private woods, remember, again. She took the first photograph together like that, then she took another photograph of the couple apart. Now in this one where the couple are apart is a figure moving through the girl. Here you see the skirt with the foot at the bottom, there's another foot behind, and the blouse and the top of the figure is actually moving through the girl. The lady concerned who took the photograph thinks that he was a recently deceased member of her family. This was taken by a man in Covent Garden, taken a picture of his child here, and his wife and the young child in the pram at the background. Here, going across in front, you see a figure moving in a very, very unusual manner, leaning forward, without any legs. And the mother says that she doesn't remember anybody going across in front of her, but even if somebody did go across, it's very unlikely they would have gone across in that angle, which is quite artificial, and without any legs. And there is a blow-up of that picture, the central part of it. Here we have two photographs taken in the Austrian Tyrol by a group of English people who were on holiday for a week. At the end of their holiday, they decided to have a bit of a do in the evening, and they were all sitting around a table having drinks and watching the floor show. And when the floor show was finished, Mr. Todd, the man who took the photograph, he is, by the way, a garage man by profession. He's an amateur photographer, doesn't know, he doesn't handle a camera better than anybody else. He's set up his camera and the table in front on delay, 10-second delay, went back, sat down, and the camera went off. But the flash didn't go off. So I immediately got up, went back to the table, I had a look at the camera, I couldn't see anything wrong, reset the delay, went back, sat down. This time the camera went off with a flash. Well, anyway, eventually went home, had a look through all the photographs I took on holiday, put them in the drawer, and that was that. Sometime later, one of the other people in the party came to visit them and said, "Oh, by the way, can I have a look at our photographs we took on holiday?" Fine, okay. So he took them out the drawer and gave them to her. And she's looking through these photographs, and suddenly she stops in her tracks and says, "Who's that? Let's have a look and see who that is." Here is the second photograph. And the second photograph, as you see, are just the people sitting round the table. Nothing particular about it at all laughing and joking. The first photograph, which appears without the flash, is something quite different. Because right in the middle of the tables, with the people surrounding them at the back, is another figure sitting there. 15% too big, slightly out of focus, when everybody else is in focus except a woman on the left here and the man who have moved slightly, but she is out of focus, I am assured by the photographic experts that is from because it's blurred, not because she moved. Say she's 15% too big. She can be seen quite clearly through the beer glasses on the table, and she is quite solid. Who is she? Nobody knows. Nobody knows where she came from, where she went to. But in that fraction of a second that camera was exposed, or perhaps maybe in 2 or 3 seconds, because if the flash didn't go off, then the camera would take a longer exposure. It would compensate. So for the couple of seconds that camera was exposed, she appeared in the film and then disappeared. Nobody saw her, nobody was aware of her. I have affidavits from all these people. I went to see all these people. I questioned them, and I gave them a questionnaire, in fact, which they filled out. Everybody, I'm sure, was telling the truth. I didn't interview 3 people because I didn't know who these 3 people were, and the rest didn't know who they were. Otherwise, it's a straightforward photograph taken by a straightforward person in a perfectly ordinary situation. And yet here we have another person appearing at a table. And I say, without any doubt whatsoever, that is an apparition.